If you fracture your arm, the medical process is, incredibly straightforward. You go to a clinic, they take an x-ray, the doctor points to a jagged white line on a glowing screen and says, there's the break.
Right, it's totally binary.
Exactly. Broken or not broken. But the moment you step into the world of psychology or neurodevelopment, that x-ray machine is just completely useless. The diagnostic landscape becomes murky, and you have to completely change the tools you use to understand what you're even looking at.
You're using a completely different diagnostic language.
Right. And today, for this deep dive, we are taking a 7th century religious text and applying that exact same tool shift. We are stress testing it not as a theological sermon, but as a piece of sophisticated sociological software.
Which is, frankly, a massive paradigm shift for how most people approach ancient scripture. I mean, when you open up a historical text, and specifically today, we're looking at the Quran, Surah An-Nur, which is chapter 24, ayats 3 through 20, the immediate expectation is just moralizing.
Oh, 100%.
You brace yourself for this list of thou shalt nots designed to, make you feel guilty about human nature.
Yeah, the expectation is totally a Sunday school lecture against gossip and sexual immorality. Just, hey, be a good person. But our mission for this deep dive is entirely different. We're drawing from a deeply analytical source today.
It's a fascinating one.
It really is. It's a lecture series by the late scholar Ghulam Ahmad Parwez, specifically Tuli Islam Digital Audio, lecture 4 out of 10. And Parwez makes this incredibly compelling argument that we need to just strip away the centuries of religious sentimentality.
Yeah, completely discard it.
We aren't looking at a plea for people to be nicer. We are looking at a masterclass in social engineering and systems architecture.
The premise Parwez sets up is that the goal of this specific text is to design an information architecture, one that makes a community structurally immune to the weaponization of rumors. Because, let's be honest, human beings are rarely nice just because the text asks them to be.
Never. History proves that pretty decisively.
Right. So instead of pleading with human nature, the text engineers a legal and social framework that anticipates human malice. It anticipates human frailty and the viral nature of gossip, and it neutralizes them.
To put it in modern terms for you listening, it's like designing a biological immune system for a society or like an architectural firewall.
Yeah.
You don't just ask the cells in a body to politely reject a virus.
That would be absurd.
Right. And you don't ask people to just try not to spread rumors. You write protocols that automatically quarantine the malicious code. You build a structure that makes spreading a rumor so personally catastrophic that the market for defamation completely collapses.
It just prices it right out of the market.
Exactly. And that is what Parwez argues Surah An-Nur is doing.
So to understand how this architectural firewall operates, we first have to examine the foundational threat it was built to withstand. The text opens by establishing the immense, almost existential gravity of the crime of Zina.
Which translates roughly to unconstrained sexual relations outside the legal and social framework of marriage, so adultery or fornication.
Yeah, and if you're listening to this with a modern, highly individualized mindset, this is immediately going to be a huge conceptual hurdle.
Oh, absolutely. In the 21st century, we generally view consensual behavior as a purely private matter. The prevailing ethos is, what happens behind closed doors is nobody's business as long as everyone consents.
Right, the libertarian approach to intimacy.
Yeah. But this 7th century text treats it as a massive systemic threat to civilizational survival. My initial reaction reading the source notes was like, why the intense focus here? Why is this specific behavior treated like a societal wrecking ball?
Well, taking a step back, what this actually tells us requires a deeply sociological lens, which Parwez provides. He draws on historical consensus and cites sociological studies.
He specifically references Western historians.
Yeah, historians who have analyzed the lifespans and the collapse of civilizations. And the overarching conclusion is that unconstrained sexual relations don't merely affect the emotional state of a couple. They exert a macro-level devastating impact on the rise and fall of entire nations.
Wow.
The source notes that a society with zero boundaries on sexual relations rarely survives past 3 generations before facing steep civilizational decline.
3 generations. I mean, in the grand scope of history, that is an absolute blip. That's a society collapsing before a great-grandparent can even see their legacy.
It's incredibly fast social entropy.
Let's dig into the why of that, though. Because, it sounds almost like a superstitious threat until you break down the actual thermodynamics of a civilization.
The mechanics are entirely pragmatic. It's not about divine anger at all. The fundamental building block, the core cell of any stable society, especially pre-industrial ones, but it still holds true today, is the family unit.
Right.
That unit is the primary mechanism for establishing paternity. And paternity dictates inheritance, wealth transfer, and the socialization of children. It is literally the most basic social safety net.
Because if paternity is a question mark, the entire economic system of inheritance just shatters. The safety net tears completely.
Exactly. When you introduce absolute chaos into the family structure through unconstrained sexual relations, you destroy the basic unit of trust and responsibility. If the foundational cell of the social organism is compromised with a kind of internal necrosis, the larger organism cannot sustain itself.
It's expending all its energy managing internal friction.
Right, the fallout of broken trust. A society consumed by unconstrained desires cannot build or maintain the discipline required for robust institutions, stable laws, or generational progress. Like we said, it's about the cold, hard math of civilizational energy.
So it's a structural vulnerability, not just a personal sin. And the text addresses this vulnerability immediately in verse 3 of Surah An-Nur. And this is where the diagnostic X-ray starts looking profoundly different from what a modern reader expects.
Oh, really does.
The verse essentially states that a person who is definitively proven to have committed Zina can only marry another person who has committed Zina, or a polytheist.
Which is a striking provision. How did you interpret that when you first read it?
I'll be honest, it sounded incredibly vindictive to me at first. It sounded like a scarlet letter, like a permanent brand marking someone as an untouchable in the society. It felt entirely contrary to the idea of a compassionate or rehabilitative system.
And it absolutely reads like a scarlet letter, if viewed through the lens of moral purity or emotional sentimentality. But Parwez asks us to strip all of that away and ask, what is the structural function of this rule?
Right, looking at it as an engineer.
Exactly. It is functionally a sociological quarantine protocol.
A quarantine. Okay, let's play that out. If a cell in a biological system is proven to be infected with a virus that actively destroys the organism's core function, the immune system isolates it.
The logic holds perfectly. By dictating that proven adulterers can only form family units with others in the identical category, the system is actively disconnecting them from the chaste or, uncompromised network.
Right.
The goal isn't to shame them for the sake of shame. The goal is to protect the baseline trust of the healthy family units. You are preventing individuals who have demonstrably violated the fundamental contract of the family unit from entering into that same contract with someone who is faithfully abiding by it.
It contains the blast radius of the broken trust. You isolate the compromised nodes so they can infect the healthy ones. I see the logic there, I really do, but I have a major problem with how that actually plays out in reality.
Let's see the pushback.
Well, if the crime is this severe, like a literal threat to the survival of the civilization, then the society's immune response has to be aggressive. But how does a state actually prosecute private behavior without creating a complete dystopian nightmare?
That is the ultimate tension in any legal code.
Right. Because if you're policing what adults do behind locked doors, you inevitably create a paranoid, hypervigilant surveillance state. You end up with neighbors spying through keyholes, morality police kicking down doors, secret informants.
That becomes East Germany.
Yes. And that doesn't sound like a stable architecture. The entropy generated by the surveillance and the paranoia would destroy the society way faster than the adultery would.
That's the exact vulnerability the text anticipates. A system that over-polices private behavior creates exponentially more social friction than it resolves. The brilliance of Parwez's analysis is highlighting how the Quran solves this specific paradox.
It acknowledges the severity of the act, but it demands an almost impossibly high bar for proof.
Yes. We're talking about the four-witness rule. To legally prove zina and enact the state punishment, which the text outlines in verse 2 as 100 lashes, the state must produce 4 adult eyewitnesses.
And Parwez is very clear about what kind of witnesses.
Extremely clear. Not just witnesses who saw 2 people walk into a room together or saw them acting affectionately. They must be 4 eyewitnesses to the actual physical act of penetration.
Which is mathematically and functionally impossible. Unless the individuals involved are literally performing the act in the middle of a crowded public square at high noon, the odds of 4 adults simultaneously witnessing the specific physical act are practically 0.
And that mathematical impossibility is the entire point.
That's wild.
The system is intentionally restricting the community's and the state's ability to prosecute the crime based on suspicion or circumstantial evidence or private behavior. By setting an evidentiary standard that is virtually insurmountable, the law is drawing a hard boundary.
It is effectively saying the state has no jurisdiction over your private life. We are not setting up cameras in your bedrooms.
Precisely.
So the 100 lash punishment isn't actually a penalty for the private act of having sex outside of marriage, because the law deliberately makes it impossible to prove that private act. The punishment is actually for the public display of indecency.
A critical distinction. If you are so brazen, so totally disregardful of the social order that you commit this act in a manner that 4 independent people can clearly witness it, you are no longer committing a private sin.
You're doing something else entirely.
You are engaging in an act of public destabilization. You are actively tearing down the civilizational fabric in broad daylight. The penalty is for open rebellion against the social structure.
The architecture maximizes private liberty by making state intrusion legally impossible while maintaining maximum public order by severely punishing blatant, undeniable violations. It's an incredibly elegant legal balance.
It is.
But, and this is big, but this immediately introduces a massive glaring loophole.
Let's explore the loophole.
If I am living in this society and I know that the evidentiary bar for proving someone committed this crime is 4 direct eyewitnesses, and I know that getting 4 eyewitnesses is practically impossible, what is stopping me from just lying? What stops anyone from destroying a rival's reputation with unprovable allegations? In any human society, the mere accusation of sexual impropriety is enough to ruin a life. It destroys careers, ends marriages, even if it is never proven in a court of law. The stigma just sticks.
It's social poison.
Exactly. So if the state can't prosecute the act itself, hasn't the architect just left the entire society completely vulnerable to the weaponization of gossip?
This brings us to what Parwez considers the most sophisticated piece of social engineering in the entire text. The architect of this system is acutely aware of that exact loophole.
Okay, how does it fix it?
Well, when you engineer a system where a specific crime is impossible to prove, the center of gravity shifts. The true danger to the society is no longer the crime itself. The true danger becomes the accusation of the crime. And so the legal framework pivots aggressively to address the accusation.
This is where we get into the economics of the text. Let's look at verse 24.4, the Qazf law. This completely blew my mind when reading the source analysis. I want to walk through the literal architecture of this verse.
Go for it.
It says, and I'm paraphrasing the Arabic structure here, وَلَاتِينَ يَرْمُونَ أَمُسَنَتُمَا لَمْ يَأْتُوا بِأَرْبَعَةِ شُهَدَاءَ. Those who accuse chaste women, and Parwez notes the legal principle applies equally to men, and then cannot produce 4 witnesses. They receive 80 lashes.
The law of false accusation, or Qazf.
So let's break down the socioeconomic math here. The punishment for a definitively proven act of Zina is 100 lashes. The punishment for an unproven accusation of Zina is 80 lashes. On paper, at a superficial glance, it looks like the sexual crime is punished slightly more heavily than the false accusation, 100 versus 80.
On paper, yes. But the genius of the system reveals itself in the practical application. How do these 2 laws operate in the actual friction of reality?
Well, as we just established, the 100 lash punishment is tied to an evidentiary standard for direct eyewitnesses that has like a 0.001% chance of ever being met. It operates almost entirely as a theoretical maximum deterrent. It is rarely, if ever, applied in a functioning society.
Right. But what about the proof for Qazf?
The proof for Qazf, the false accusation, the proof is immediate and undeniable.
Because the proof is the accusation itself.
Yes. If I stand up in the town square or write an op-ed or post on a social media platform that John Doe committed Zina, and I do not have 4 eyewitnesses standing directly behind me to corroborate it, I have just provided 100% undeniable self-incriminating proof that I have committed Qazf.
You've convicted yourself.
Exactly. The state doesn't need to launch a 6-month investigation. I made the claim. I lack the witnesses. Therefore, the 80 lashes are applied to me immediately.
Look at how the structural incentives flip in practice. The penalty for a false accusation is vastly heavier, vastly more certain, and vastly more present in everyday life than the penalty for the act it alleges.
That's brilliant.
The system purposefully makes prosecuting the sexual act nearly impossible to protect privacy, but it makes prosecuting the defamation almost automatic to protect public trust.
It's an anti-DDoS system for human society.
Oh, I like that analogy. Break that down.
So a distributed denial of service DDoS attack works by flooding a computer server with so many fake unverified requests that the legitimate traffic can't get through. The system gets overwhelmed and the server crashes.
Right.
Rumors and whispering campaigns are social DDoS attacks. They flood the community with unverified, highly inflammatory garbage data until the baseline trust breaks down. Paranoia takes over and the community collapses. By guaranteeing an immediate severe physical and social penalty for the accuser, the system stops the DDoS attack at the source. It drops the malicious packets before they ever reach the server.
And we haven't even touched on the most severe aspect of the Qazf penalty.
Oh, man. Yeah, the 80 lashes are just the physical deterrent.
Exactly. There is a second half to verse 24.4 that is the true socio-economic masterstroke. وَلَا تَقْبَلُوا لَهُمْ شَهَادَةً أَبَدًا, and never accept their testimony again.
Civic's death.
Permanent civic death. The total irreversible disqualification of their ability to bear witness in any legal, economic, or social capacity for the rest of their lives.
We really need to translate bearing witness for a modern listener because it sounds like an archaic courtroom drama, like, I bear witness, Your Honor.
It's so much deeper than that.
In a functioning society, especially the ones being discussed, losing your right to testify is the equivalent of permanently losing your civic credit score. It is a total excision from the legal and economic life of your community.
Consider the real-world implications of that.
If I'm convicted of Qazf and my testimony is permanently rejected, my economic life is over. I can never sign a binding contract. I can never act as a witness to a marriage or a business merger. I can never witness a will.
You're locked out of the economy.
Yes. And legally, if someone steals my property in broad daylight and I take them to court, my testimony against the thief is legally invalid. If I'm the victim of an assault, my word means absolutely nothing in the eyes of the law. I become a ghost in the system. I have no legal recourse, no economic mobility, and no social standing.
This is where Parwez's analysis completely divorces the text from theology and grounds it in systems theory. God isn't delivering a moralizing sermon saying, lying makes me sad, please try to be honest.
No, not at all.
This is a meticulously engineered economic system designed to price defamation out of the market.
Pricing it out of the market, that is just the perfect way to frame it.
Think about the evolutionary psychology of why humans gossip. Historically, the cost of spreading a rumor is zero. You whisper something at the water cooler, you passively retweet a sensational headline, or you share a piece of juicy gossip at a dinner party.
It's cheap entertainment.
It costs you absolutely nothing. In fact, it grants you temporary social currency and attention, but it has the power to utterly destroy the target's life. It is the ultimate asymmetrical weapon. The Quranic text corrects that asymmetry.
It attaches a catastrophic, permanent, personal cost to the weaponization of rumor. It structurally disincentivizes the whispering campaign.
If you know that repeating an unverified allegation about someone's private life will result not just in physical punishment, but in you losing your right to participate in the economy and the legal system forever, the biological urge to gossip is instantly overridden by the survival instinct.
You will shut your mouth.
You will demand the four witnesses yourself before you even think about repeating it.
It forces every single citizen in the society to act as an active evidentiary firewall. If a friend comes to me with a scandalous piece of gossip, my immediate self-interested response isn't curiosity. My response is panic. I'm going to say, do you have four witnesses? No. Then do not tell me another word, because if I repeat it, my financial and legal life is permanently over.
It stops the virus dead at the very first note.
A society where known false accusers cannot testify before courts is a society that is fundamentally immune to the tyranny of unproven assertions. The text is building an environment where people are forced to be rigorously epistemologically sound. Not because they are inherently virtuous angels, but because the cost of being careless with information is existential.
The loop is completely closed. The system handles public indecency by demanding impossible evidence, and it handles public defamation by imposing absolute permanent ruin.
But if we are stress testing this software, we have to look for edge cases. I want to throw a scenario at this architecture that seems explicitly designed to break it.
I love a good edge case. Let's hear it.
What happens when the accusation occurs behind closed doors, within the one intimate relationship where the four-witness rule creates an impossible paradox? What if a husband accuses a wife?
The ultimate domestic glitch.
Right. Let's play it out. A husband walks into his own home. He sees something or he strongly suspects something based on circumstantial evidence. There are obviously no four eyewitnesses present. He makes the accusation. Now, under the rigid, uncompromising application of the laws we just discussed, the system hits an epistemological deadlock.
Epistemological deadlock, meaning a he said, she said scenario where the objective truth is literally impossible to uncover using standard evidence.
Exactly. The husband cannot prove the Zina because he doesn't have the four witnesses. So the state's hands are tied. But the state also cannot simply turn around, enforce 80 lashes and permanent civic death on the husband for cause, and then force the couple to stay married.
That would be horrific.
You can't say to a man, well, you couldn't produce 4 witnesses to your wife's infidelity, so take your severe beating, lose all your citizenship rights, and go back home and share a bed with her. That would be psychological torture. It would inevitably result in domestic violence. So how does this highly structured, rigid architecture handle this specific impossible paradox?
This scenario is exactly why Parwez refers to these verses as an engine of reason. The architect of the system anticipates this exact failure state. When the 4-witness standard cannot possibly be met, but the accusation is so intimate, so foundational to the family structure, that it cannot simply be dismissed or punished as standard public defamation. The system introduces a highly specialized legal subroutine.
A subroutine, I love that.
This is the Lian provision, detailed in verses 24.6-9.
The mutual oath-taking.
Yes. It functions as a structured legal workaround. A very specific release valve designed to handle an unprovable private dispute without tearing the broader social fabric apart.
Let's break down the mechanics of the Lian, because it reads less like a religious ritual and more like a high-stakes procedural lie detector test.
It really does.
The husband brings his accusation to the formal court. Since he lacks witnesses, the judge initiates the Lian protocol. The husband is required to stand and swear 4 separate, formal, legally binding oaths by God that he is telling the truth. And then on the 5th oath, he must explicitly call the curse of God upon himself if he is lying.
Pause right there and look at the mathematical symmetry. 4 solemn oaths replacing the 4 impossible witnesses. The structural integrity of the 4 requirement is perfectly maintained.
Yes, the system keeps its own internal logic consistent. Now, once the husband has sworn this massive damning oath, the wife is in a precarious position. But the system gives her an absolute right to counter and deflect summary punishment.
She gets her own turn.
She stands up in the same court and swears 4 separate formal oaths by God that he is lying. And on her 5th oath, she calls the wrath of God upon herself if he is telling the truth.
And what is the immediate legal result once both parties complete these oaths?
According to Parwez's analysis of the text, the procedure results in the immediate, automatic, and irrevocable separation of the couple. The marriage contract is dissolved on the spot.
And that is the structural brilliance of the Lian provision. Look at what it achieves sociologically. We started with an impossible deadlock. The husband knows what he saw or believes. The wife completely denies it. There is absolutely zero objective proof. And forcing them to stay together in a broken, untrusting marriage is a recipe for disaster.
Right.
If this same scenario plays out in a normal, unstructured society, what is the inevitable result?
Endless, corrosive, destructive gossip. The husband goes and vents to his family. The wife defends herself to her family. The tribal lines are drawn. The community takes sides. The rumors spiral out of control. And inevitably, historically speaking, the woman's reputation is the primary casualty, regardless of whether she was actually guilty or innocent.
Precisely. The court of public opinion is cruel and asymmetrical. But the Lian resolves the deadlock without ever activating the community's gossip apparatus. It extracts the private radioactive dispute from the public square and forces it through a highly structured, solemn legal framework.
And crucially, it protects the woman from an unprovable slander. This is a point Parwez emphasizes heavily. If a husband decides he simply wants to destroy his wife out of spite, he might be tempted to just spread rumors.
Because it's easy.
Exactly. But under the Lian, she is handed an equal and opposite mechanism to defend herself. By taking her own oath, she legally and totally neutralizes his accusation. The state accepts her 5 oaths as carrying the exact same legal weight as his 5 oaths.
Because it is a legal draw.
Right. She cannot be punished for the alleged act of adultery, and she cannot be treated as a convicted adulterer by the broader society.
The dispute is hermetically sealed. The marriage, which is clearly broken beyond repair due to the catastrophic loss of trust, is dissolved cleanly and legally. The woman's social and legal standing is preserved against an allegation she cannot physically disprove, and the husband is not subjected to the 80 lashes and civic death of standard Qazf because the Lian serves as a specific, narrow exemption for spouses.
It is a flawless algorithmic solution to a fatal system error.
Yeah.
It's incredibly satisfying to see the logic lock into place like that.
It really is.
We've seen how the architecture handles undeniable public indecency. We've seen how it prices formal public defamation out of the market. And we've seen how it carefully dissects intimate, unprovable disputes between spouses. As a theoretical framework, it is masterful. But
There's always a but when dealing with human beings.
always. Because human beings are messy, irrational, and prone to panic. What happens when the legal framework is bypassed entirely?
What do you mean?
What happens when nobody has the courage to go to court, nobody makes a formal, documented accusation, but a rumor just starts? A whisper at the market, an implication passed between friends, and it spreads like a virus through the general public, infecting node after node until everyone in the city knows it's true, even though absolutely nobody has proven anything.
The whisper network.
How does this system deal with a society that has already been infected by a whispering campaign?
This is where Parwez takes us into Section 4 of his lecture, exploring what he terms the law of requital, or mukafat e amal. And to explore this concept, he guides us through one of the most famous and controversial historical events in Islamic history, the Ifk episode, or the incident of the slander, which covers verses 24.1120.
And this is where the deep dive gets genuinely controversial, and I love how analytically, almost surgically, Parwez handles it.
He pulls no punches.
None at all. The Ifk episode refers to a historical event where a massive damaging rumor is spread through the city of Medina regarding Aisha, the Prophet's wife. But Parwez's lecture takes a fiercely critical, almost combative stance against the traditional, centuries-old narratives of this event. Narratives that are canonized in highly revered historical texts like Sahih Bukhari.
He does. Parwez argues that the traditional narrative, which the vast majority of people accept as unquestioned historical fact, is not just factually dubious. He argues it is a profound insult to the intelligence of the very legal system we have just spent the last 40 minutes analyzing.
Let's lay out the traditional story first, just so we have the context for you listening before we deconstruct it. Parwez refers to this traditional narrative as an afsana, a fiction.
A total fabrication.
The story goes that Aisha was accidentally left behind in the desert during a military journey. She had stepped away from the camp to look for a lost necklace. The caravan moved on without realizing her litter was empty, and she was stranded. She was eventually found and brought back to Medina by a young man, a camel driver who had been trailing the army.
And because she arrived back alone with another man, the whispering started.
Right. And the traditional narrative claims that for an entire month, this rumor festered and grew. The Prophet allegedly acted cold and distant toward Aisha, eventually sending her back to her parents' house. During this month, he supposedly held deep consultations with figures like Ali and Usama, asking their advice on what to do about his wife's suspected infidelity, while the entire city of Medina gossiped about her behind her back.
And this agonizing tension supposedly went on for a month until divine revelation finally descended to clear her name.
That is the story that has been told for centuries. Now, Parwez asks us to apply the systems analysis we've been using to that specific narrative.
And the moment you do that, the whole story falls apart. From a systems engineering perspective, the traditional story makes the architect of the system look like he completely ignored his own code.
Exactly. Let's examine the timeline and the underlying legal logic. Parwez points out a glaring chronological and legal contradiction. Surah An-Nur, with its incredibly strict Qazf laws, demand 4 witnesses or immediately face 80 lashes and permanent civic death had already been established.
The state already possessed the exact legal mechanism required to crush rumors instantly.
Yes. If a functional state, led by the Prophet himself as the chief executive, had just implemented a law making false, unwitnessed accusations punishable by civic death, why on earth would that state let a rumor about the leader's own wife fester for a month without prosecuting the whisperers?
The contradiction is impossible to reconcile. Why would the leader of the state consult his friends and advisors about a rumor instead of simply demanding the 4 witnesses as his own law dictates?
Right. If someone came to the Prophet and said, "People in the market are whispering about Aisha and the camel driver," his response, according to the very legal code he established, should have been immediate and uncompromising. Produce 4 eyewitnesses right now, or prepare to receive 80 lashes and lose your citizenship rights. Boom. End of story. The rumor dies right there.
It would have been shut down on day 1.
The source argues forcefully that the traditional narrative is a much later fabrication that fundamentally contradicts the Quran's timeline and its rigorous legal logic. It portrays the Prophet as helpless, suspicious, and violating the very protocols of evidence he was supposed to enforce upon his own people.
Parwez is saying you cannot celebrate the sheer brilliance of the Qazf law as a firewall against defamation, and simultaneously believe the traditional Ifk narrative where the firewall was completely ignored. They are mutually exclusive.
This is a masterclass in applying critical thinking to historical sources. Parwez is prioritizing the structural integrity and internal logic of the primary text, the Quran, over the secondary historical narratives that contradict its basic premises.
So if we discard the traditional month-long soap opera story as a fabrication, what is the actual historical context of the Ifk verses? And more importantly, what is the systemic lesson we are supposed to learn from it?
The text itself provides the exact parameters of what happened. A group of people within the community manufactured a lie, a slander, an Ifk, and it began to spread. The crucial part of Parwez's analysis is not playing historical whodunit to figure out who started it.
The specific names don't matter.
No, the vital takeaway is what the text says about the psychology of the people who spread the rumor and the devastating consequences that act has on the society.
This brings us to verse 24.15, and honestly, this is one of the most chilling and relevant verses I read in the entire source packet. The text addresses the general populace, the people who just passed the rumor along, and it says, "Witasabunahu haza awahu anda Allahi azim." You thought passing it on was a trivial thing, but to God it is immense.
You thought it was trivial. That right there is the defining psychological characteristic of our modern information age, isn't it?
Oh, without a doubt.
The casual retweet, the offhand comment in a group chat, the passive sharing of a sensational headline. We inherently think that sharing unverified information is a minor, victimless act. We tell ourselves, I didn't start the rumor, I'm just passing along what I heard. It's just gossip.
But the text rejects that excuse entirely. It says the act of passing it on is immense. And Parwez frames this through the law of requital, or social entropy. And we need to be clear here. God isn't going to strike you with a lightning bolt from the sky because you gossiped at the water cooler.
No, it's not a magical punishment.
The punishment is baked into the action itself. It is a natural law of social physics. When a community normalizes the casual transmission of unverified accusations, it doesn't just hurt the individual victim of the rumor. It corrodes the community's own internal immunity to social poison.
The text explicitly identifies the concrete structural damage in verse 24.1i. Hashat al-fahisha fi alatina amanu. The spreading of indecency among the believers. Now, typically, when people read the word indecency, their minds immediately jump to sexual immorality.
They think it means people are having wild parties.
Exactly. They think the verse means the society is having too much sex. But in the context of the Ifk, the indecency isn't a sexual act at all because the sexual act never actually happened. It was a total fabrication. The indecency the verse is condemning is the culture of accusation itself.
That is a massive fundamental distinction.
Yeah.
The indecency isn't the sex.
Yeah.
The indecency is the gossip.
Yes. The structural damage to a civilization occurs when a society becomes comfortable with discussing the intimate, private lives of its members without demanding proof.
Because once the cultural norm of verify before transmitting breaks down, civilizational trust degrades at a terrifying speed. You create a society of pervasive paranoia, a society where anyone, you, your brother, your leader, can be utterly destroyed at any time by a simple, unprovable whisper.
That is the social entropy Parwez is talking about.
Every single time you retransmit an unverified accusation, you are chipping away at the foundation of your own security. You are actively participating in civilizational self-harm.
To bring back the immune system analogy, it's like deliberately turning off the antivirus software on your entire company's network just because you want to see what a piece of malware looks like.
It's so reckless.
You might think you're just looking at one file, but you are compromising the entire load-bearing structure of the system. And what's truly profound about this is that the Quran treats the people who spread the rumor with almost as much severity as the people who invented it. Because the inventor of the lie is just one malicious node. The spreaders, the casual gossipers, are the ones who provide the bandwidth.
They are the ones who turn a localized glitch into a systemic collapse.
They are the willing infrastructure for the destruction of trust.
Okay, let's step back and look at the grand synthesis of everything we've covered today. This is the synthesis of permanence and change. We are looking at the awe-inspiring architecture of Surah An-Nur 3:20. When you strip away the centuries of moralizing, the theological baggage, and the fabricated historical dramas, what are we actually left with?
We are looking at a masterfully engineered community where three fundamental load-bearing pillars uphold the entire social structure.
Let's review those pillars to solidify the framework. Pillar 1. The legal consequences for a false accusation are heavier, more immediate, and more certain than the act it alleges. The system systematically prices defamation out of the market by imposing catastrophic personal and economic costs, the 80 lashes and permanent civic death.
Pillar 2. Private, unprovable disputes, the domestic edge cases that threaten to tear families and communities apart in a he said, she said deadlock, are funneled through structured, highly formal legal procedures like the Lian.
Right, which completely neutralizes the public gossip.
These procedures force a legal resolution and completely eliminate the need for public exposure or the activation of the community rumor mill.
In Pillar 3, the casual transmission of unverified information is treated not as a petty personal flaw to be confessed away, but as an act of profound civilizational self-harm. The society recognizes that its very survival depends on strict epistemological hygiene. The mandate is clear: verify before transmitting or face systemic collapse.
The Quran in these verses is not begging people to be nicer. It isn't trying to magically change the flawed reality of human nature. It is designing an information architecture that keeps communities highly functional and unified under intense social stress. It anticipates human malice, it anticipates our evolutionary urge to gossip, and it builds a robust firewall against them all.
And this brings us back to you, the listener. Knowledge is only truly valuable when it is understood and applied to your reality. We spent the last hour dissecting a 7th century text, but this isn't a historical artifact to be admired in a museum case. It is a hyper-relevant manual on information architecture.
We are living in an era where institutional and interpersonal trust is degrading faster than at any point in modern human history, precisely because we have entirely abandoned these architectural principles. We are drowning daily in the tyranny of unproven assertions.
Which leaves us with a final and, I think, incredibly provocative thought experiment for you to mull over as you go about your day. Imagine taking this exact architectural blueprint we just discussed, this 7th century social engineering, and applying it forcefully to our 21st century digital world.
It is a fascinating proposition.
What would it actually take to implement the Qazf standard today? Imagine a major social media platform or a massive 24-hour news outlet that faced the modern equivalent of 80 lashes and civic death. Let's say massive, existential, uninsurable financial penalties that could bankrupt them overnight, and a permanent disqualification from the public square.
Imagine if a protocol was written into the internet itself. The absolute moment an account, whether it's an anonymous troll or a major publication, spreads a career-destroying, unverified accusation, that account is instantly and permanently deleted. The user is legally banned from ever creating another one.
The publication loses its broadcasting license forever.
No ad revenue, no platform, complete digital civic death.
It would completely, violently restructure the internet economy overnight. The entire modern clickbait model relies exclusively on the fact that spreading unverified outrage is highly profitable and carries absolutely zero personal or financial cost.
Exactly. The cost is zero, and the profit is massive. So the ultimate question is, if we somehow implemented the Qazf protocol online today, would our internet survive the sudden shock of losing 90% of its daily engagement? Or would it finally be cured of the virus that is tearing our society apart?
That is something to think deeply about the next time you feel the urge to hit share on a sensational story you haven't personally verified.
Consider it a diagnostic check for our own digital immune systems. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the invisible systems around you, always demand verification, and we will see you next time.